and welcome to How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Marietta.
And I'm Connie. And today we are here with my sister-in-law, Sarah Winkelmann. And we've already had Mitch. So now we get to hear her side of the story since Mitch was out of it half the time. Anywho, Sarah, tell everybody about yourself.
Hi, my name is Sarah Winkelmann. I am, as she said, Connie's sister-in-law and Retta's cousin. And my husband is Mitchell Winkelmann, which is why I'm here today to speak on accessibility and what it's like to be the caregiver and wife of someone who had a spinal cord injury. Mitch sustained his spinal cord injury on August 14, and it is now about 18 months later. And so
oh my God, doesn't even seem like it.
I know. We definitely have a couple months under the belt, to say the least, but always just trying to share our story and what we're passionate about.
Great. You have a really good intro. Some people are like, I don't know.
Including your husband. He was like, I don't know what I do.
That sounds about right. It's kind of part of the joke kind of now of our relationship of that I have really fallen into the advocacy side, which
and
you
Mitch is
see
like,
often.
Whatever.
Yeah. And you see often in this role of where the caregiver or the spouse takes on this like heavy hitter advocacy role and the person living in it, that's their world. And so to describe your new life is just kind of funny versus describing someone who is constantly speaking up, speaking out about what it is. It kind of makes sense why one has an intro and one doesn't.
Well, it's more annoying for you. The things that happen, it's more irritating to you because you're the caregiver than Mitch, because he's just like, I'm here, man. Let's do this thing.
It's definitely a bit different. Although sometimes, if he's in a normal seat or chair, his disability is invisible, but the effects that happen to the caregiver or spouse are invisible. And that's the reason I have a tattoo on the same scar length of Mitch's, because it's kind of my battle wound from, the accident. Everyone has expressed that in different ways, post-accident. But for me, that was what I needed.
There you go. Got to do what works. And you're not the first person to say that. We talked to a couple that she had a double lung transplant, and we talked to both of them, and it was the same type of thing where he viewed it very differently than she did. So
it's a great thing to get both sides. And on top of that, it's very different because like she doesn't remember the lung transplant, like most of what, and he's like, it was hell. And I'm like, yeah, this is how this is going to go too.
Yeah, exactly. Mitch doesn't remember 3 weeks, and those 3 weeks were the hardest for me. It's definitely a different looking glass.
Yes.
Yeah. So since you mentioned it, talk to us about those 3 weeks. What emotional roller coaster did you ride on for those 3 weeks?
Yeah, my roller coaster is definitely a bit different than others that I've talked to who've had a similar lived experience. I was in a severe denial phase for weeks. When we got to the hospital, Mitch was in the ER. I came in, I said hello to him, and he looked like him. And so I got this call. I was getting ready for work. I was literally in the shower. His buddy called me and was like, shit went down. Mitch got in an accident. And at first I thought he was messing with me. So I was like, haha, you're so funny.
So funny.
Yeah. Oh, I was like, put Mitch on the phone. It's fine. And it took me probably a good 3 minutes to actually believe them. And then I realized that it was true that my husband was in a helicopter and going to the hospital. So that was definitely interesting. And it was that point of I, now looking back, realized I did not understand the full capacity of what was happening. I remember asking his buddy's name was Mike, who called me, how's he doing? And he said, he's still alive. And I remember he's a paramedic and firefighter who told me. And so I remember like, that's a very distinct words to choose when it comes to a situation like that. And my first reaction was to call my work because I was going to miss the wedding that I was supposed to be the coordinator for. And then after spending about 10 minutes of figuring out my work situation, called my mom and was like, I don't know what to do now. Like I did all I knew how to do. So whatever, got an Uber, got to the hospital. got there. Mitch looked like himself. There was no bruises. There was no blood. And when I looked in his eyes, I saw fear, but I saw my husband still. And so the doctor pulled me out. He's like, we need to talk to you. He told me Mitch would never walk again and he's not sure if he's going to live. And I called him a fucking idiot straight to his face. And
good for you.
Yeah, I didn't believe him. It was definitely denial that led that choice of vocabulary.
Well, yeah, and it's a stressful situation. Like, it's also stress and denial. It's like, no, this can't even be happening.
Yeah.
I also can't imagine at that point they would have known without a doubt that he wouldn't walk again. I feel like that's a little jumping the gun.
Now looking back and understanding more on how to identify SCIs, especially complete SCIs, there are definitely some trigger warnings that the general public doesn't know about that the paramedics and doctors saw, but they don't disclose to you those things. I mean, for me, like I went back into the room and his friends were joking around with him saying that they drove the Mustang and you tried to start moving. And so I was like, I can see that you're moving. I don't understand. But the things that I was missing was that he couldn't move any of his lower body, and my brain didn't even say like wiggle your toes because all I'm worried about is that they told me he could die. So I'm worried about his head, his function. And I remember asking the doctor if they were doing a CT scan because that's how Meredith lost Derek in Grey's Anatomy. And I refused to lose Mitch to a brain bleed. And that's where my brain went to, though.
You associate something with what you know.
Yes. And it felt like I was watching TV. It didn't feel like my life. So that was absolutely insane. He went into his first neurosurgery the next morning where they could not complete the surgery due to the severity of his accident. Basically what happened is his C5 vertebrae exploded and impinged his spinal cord 0.9 of a centimeter, which is close to severing it. And then additionally, there was damage to C5, C6, C7. So went through the first neurosurgery, brought him back after about 6 hours and told us we couldn't finish it. The swelling was too bad. We're going to have him rest until the second. That was a couple days later. And things started to look a little better. And then things took a really quick turn for the worst. He got an infection in his incision. He went from me weaning him off the ventilator for 13 hours to I left and talked to him. He actually spoke words to me, to leaving and getting like 3 hours of sleep and then coming back to him having 104-degree fever. Then trying to put him back on the vent and ask me if I want to pull the plug.
Why would they jump to, and so you're going to pull the plug?
Yeah, I genuinely question that till this day. And the way the doctor phrased it to me, this is the same doctor I called an idiot in the ER. Let's start there. He came up to me and said, have you ever played the what if game with Mitch? And I was like, yeah. And what question do you have that you're so curious about? He goes, did he ever ask you what decision he'd want to make if he was on life support? And Mitch and I actually had this conversation probably 2-3 weeks before.
Oh my God.
And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, Mitch said that he would want me to pull the plug, but he's a fucking idiot too. So he's staying alive.
I love it. I love it so much. You were like, absolutely fucking not.
I mean, I just turned 26 at this point. I was 26 for 3 months. Mitch and I have been married for 8 months. We only had our mini moni. His accident happened 73 days before our big Mexico wedding.
No.
I was like, you are not taking away my husband. You can't even, that never even crossed my mind.
Yeah.
To think about pulling the plug. And I told him, I was like, you've lost it. And I asked him like why he thought that was the right answer. And he said, well, I can never make the right decision for people. I can just give them their options based on the things that are in front of me.
That guy's a moron.
Yeah. It was,
sorry.
I mean, looking at Mitch's infection and his quality of life moving forward, at that point, he had severe deficits and his deficits were getting worse due to his infection. and he was going to have to go into a third neurosurgery, which could also have killed him.
And like, wouldn't it have been like giving up? Like, you're mid everything. There's so much going on, and it'd be like, bye. Like, I feel like this is something you would say to somebody who's really old, like my mother-in-law or something. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, even, someone I couldn't imagine, and I have never imagined getting this question presented to you below 70. And so to get that question presented to you in a very serious way was aggressive, to say the least.
I mean, Sarah, I'm sure you probably know this. My dad's brother suffered a similar accident. Granted, it was a long time ago. And they did eventually have to pull the plug because his entire body started failing. But that was a year later. It was a year later before they had to make that decision. So it's kind of baffling that they would ask you that so soon. And they waited with my dad's brother until he was literally failing.
Yeah. He definitely had a lot of things fighting against him. And so I always, whenever I tell a story, like, I appreciate what the hospital did for us because they did save his life. I know he was not in the best care that he could have been, and they refused to transfer him due to his stability and due to being in the middle of a global pandemic, which had a large part of to do with his care that he received. And so I know that the doctors were making their best choices with what they could at that time. Do I agree with the choices that they made? There's many times where I've considered suing them.
We actually asked Mitchell about that, and he said it's too much money, too hard to actually get a good conviction in your favor.
Yeah, it is. When you look at medical malpractice, there is a large range of he said, she said. And with Mitch having no conscious memory for nearly 3 weeks, it's me versus paperwork. If you think about the justice system, if you have opinions or not on it, they are going to favor people who are being defended by they're going to defend paperwork every day long. No matter how many notes I have in my notes app, they aren't going to believe it. It doesn't mean anything. And so for us, they basically would have put us through, they traditionally, you see like 2 to 3 years for malpractice suits. And so it's, do you want to live in your misery of the hardest time of your life for years and talk about it over and over and over again, or do you accept it and move on?
Yeah.
And that's what we decided, which was really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think before the infection happened, do you think he would have had more mobility? Because remember, and our listeners know that he had at first belly feeling up to his belly button, and then all of a sudden it was up to his nipples.
Yes, the neurosurgeon even said going into this next surgery that he would most likely lose function due to, I mean, you're cleaning out an infection in the spinal cord. You're literally scraping on a piece of your body that's never supposed to be touched. There is a seal around your spinal cord called the dura, and his was leaking astronomical amounts of dura fluid to the extent of where there's nurses who've been in the ICU for 30 plus years there, and they've never seen this before. And so we were fighting a battle that was unknown to people. I had ICU nurses that had their first day in Mitch's room, and they were his most severe case. And so we had a lot of things going against us in that way. I can confirm that he lost function from his surgery. There's no question if and or but about it. There was one point he doesn't remember it. He was under heavy sedation. I literally have a video of him moving his own foot. He most likely, now knowing what I know, was a C5 incomplete, which means that you have sensation and some function of your body below its injury level. After his accident, and this actually aligns still with the concept of him being previously incomplete, because he still has more function than a C5 complete should or would have if he was like a true C5 complete, because he can move he has finger function, although it's not at full extent, he has it, when a C5 complete wouldn't have any finger function. And so the theory or concept of that he lost function from the infection is very viable.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what has been the hardest part of Mitchell's accident?
Do we have 5 hours to talk? I mean, when it comes down to it, I personally think for myself, the hardest thing was putting trust in others. A large part of that stemmed from my first interactions with the doctors at the hospital. It's hard to put trust in someone who comes at you super aggressively, starting out with just immediately telling me, Mitch will never walk again. We have no hope. Starting a relationship, which ended up being a relationship that was 31 days long, was not a great way of starting this. And that really started my mistrust for others. It made me question what actually happened at the accident. It made me question if the right things were done before he got to the hospital. It made me question every doctor or nurse that walked through the door. And then seeing mistakes happen along the way in the hospital only reassured my fears. There was days of where he had to wear boots to make sure he wasn't getting pressure sores on his feet, things like that. I'd come in and the boots were on backwards. And I would be like, I've left for 5 minutes. I've gone to the bathroom, washed my hands. I've come back and someone changed his boots and messed them up, to which could cause a pressure sore, to do the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do.
Oh my God.
The amount of conversations I had going up to the charge nurse saying, walk in here with me and look at what I'm seeing and tell me I'm not losing my mind. There was many days where I was offered scrubs because I'm a better nurse than what they have. I am not a nurse. I am an event producer. And so trust was ripped out from underneath me at the beginning. And then once he got to rehab, I started going back to work. And so I had to trust that when I went to work, well, the biggest thing now is he's doing these skills, which he had to learn to do transfers by himself, how to get in and out of bed, how to comfortably, transition himself, put on his own socks, all of these things. But he's moving his body in a way that he's never moved before, and he can't control 3/4 of his body. And then I get told that his OT and PT are just standing back, watching to make sure he doesn't fall on the ground. Well, I don't know these people. I don't trust these people. And there was a constant fear of he was going to get hurt again. They tell you once your neck is broken, no matter if you have a fusion or not, Mitch has a fusion from C5 to T2. If you break it again, it's worse. Like a little break afterwards.
Well,
your bones are deteriorating, everything's happening. And so the constant fear of what that could cause was horrifying. And then getting discharged 2 months later, I don't think I actually slept for weeks. You don't trust yourself that you're doing the right thing. And then things just keep going wrong, no matter if you follow everything that they taught you. I mean, I've never changed bed sheets more in my life than I did in the first 2 weeks of Mitch being home, just because life with an SCI means it's not just that you can't walk, it's that your bowels and bladder don't, you can't control them anymore. You can't feel your body. So you can only imagine the things that your body is, doing and causing because of that. There's severe spasms that you can't control. Like the amount of things that happen because of an SCI are so much greater than walking. And so the constant fear and trusting in others was absolutely the hardest thing, and still is the hardest thing. Because when you can't trust others, you can't ask for people for help.
Yeah.
And that is where the caregiver crisis came in globally through COVID, but then also I felt it personally I was afraid to give up his care to others, even if it was a family member that I dearly love and trust as individuals. I didn't trust them with this level of care because I wasn't even comfortable with myself doing it. And I was at the OT-PT sessions. So that was definitely the hardest part for me. Definitely moments of just pure fear.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a drug that Mitch got put on, and I say drug, it was a medicine that he was put on, and it caused him to chew uncontrollably on himself, his hands, his mouth, his tongue, to the point of where he was bleeding uncontrollably. And to stop it, I had nothing else, so I shoved my hand in there.
Oh my God.
He's chewing on my hand now.
He needed baby chew toys.
I tried. I gave him like night guards. We gave him everything.
It was just not happening.
That's
it,
crazy.
it was his brain was having a side effect from this medicine. And I remember looking at him and saying, "Don't you love me? Why won't you stop biting me? Like, you're hurting me. You're gonna go down to the bone." And you could see the fear in his eyes, and he's shaking his head no, and he couldn't control it. He couldn't stop it. And it was a moment of, oh my God, I've lost him. That's where, for me, like, if you're talking about like a moment in time that was the hardest, it was the fog of the drugs, of him uncontrolling bashing his head into the medical bed that he was laying in, because he was trying to get the ventilator out of his mouth, trying to rip it out. And like, basically you could see him trying to physically scream, but there's a ventilator down his throat. And then knowing the only thing that would make him feel better is to dose him with more sedative, to the point of where he started tapping on his belly to get more sedation because he was in so much pain.
Yeah.
And knowing that I couldn't do anything besides call for the nurse again was horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a moment in time, roid rage is horrifying. And the side effects of medicines that are sedation, such as Versed and ketamine, and the tears that happen through their body, that
which is that's what caused the infection, right? Is that road rage basically ripped open the stitches, got him the infection, and made him lose. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you can never pinpoint an infection on one thing. What the doctors blamed it on was that he was, quote unquote, too strong for the sedation. And so he kept waking up, and he would push himself on his elbows and hit his head and back into the bed and into the side of the medical bed. And they blamed it on that. There's also, that they didn't clean his wound for multiple days on end while I was there, and other things that definitely contributed to, but we'll never know. There's no way to track these things back, but that definitely was a large contributing factor to his infection.
Yeah. There's no way to know for 100% certainty exactly what triggered it. Yeah. I get what you mean.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't know this, that you can't make every house ADA compliant. So you guys are doing all of this. You had to move on top of it. And then not only did you have to move, you had to make your house ADA compliant. So
yes,
aside from moving, what was one of the hardest things in your house to get changed to be accommodating for Mitch?
It sounds basic, but like doorways, a normal doorway in a house just isn't wide enough.
Yep.
Mitch also has a very skinny wheelchair. He's in a manual chair versus an electric chair. So his chair is much smaller. Even with that being said, I think there's only 2 original doors in our entire house. We, as you mentioned, had to sell our first home because it would have cost more than buying a whole new house out of pocket to make it accessible. So we sold that house, bought this new house, and then did 8 months of renovations on it, and basically had to tore it down to its bones. The thing that surprised me the most, though, was doorways. Most difficult, though, I mean, for me, I refuse to live to the standard of ADA, because ADA is the starting block. It is just where you start accommodations, not where you finish. And so if you look at ADA ruling, it may have to be this big and the sink has to be this tall. Well, Mitch doesn't fit under all ADA sinks. So I had to get him a custom-made sink for our kitchen so he could actually go underneath it and function in our kitchen. I redid the entire kitchen. Don't mind me, I'm staring at it like you guys can see it. I redid the entire kitchen to where he would be able to transfer an item from like the kitchen to the island, or from the sink to the island, and just be able to slide it around. Because even if it's accessible, it doesn't mean it's comfortable for him. And so my big mindset when doing the renovations was comfort. Because if you're in your home, you should be comfortable, you should be able. If you're not, then I don't think it's a home. You're in a house, you're in a place.
Yes.
And so that is definitely a big thing for me, was a lot of those like small details, but definitely a base level. We go to people's houses and you can't fit 3 places. And that's always interesting. I think you guys know, of course, that we came out of inpatient rehab and had to move into Connie, Mitch's, and Rieta's grandma's house for about 8 months. And we got there, had to put a ramp out to just get him into the place because there was only one step, but one step when you're one day out of inpatient rehab seems like a mountain. And then he's going down the hallway to the back bedroom and he can't fit. I just remember, like, I was in my brain, I was like, do I cry? Do I scream? Do I just walk out? Like, what options do I have here? And the option ended up being that we ripped the baseboards out.
You got to do what you got to do.
And then all of a sudden we didn't have a door, and the bathroom didn't have a doorknob, and all of these little things just to make sanity out of the space that we were in.
That's what blows my mind the most is like, I don't understand why we just don't make all doorways, because it's like 2 or 3 inches. It's minimal.
Yeah.
Why don't we just make all doorways big enough?
It's bizarre, actually.
No, it's very often forgotten. And then when you look at to renovate or just like do like small accommodations to a home that already exists. So say you're in a rentable space, or like I'm in grandma's, I'm not trying to rip out her entire door. And so I was like, well, I know there's hinges that make the door go farther. So I go online and I'm on Amazon, I'm looking at the hinges, and they're $23 per hinge.
Oh my gosh.
Replace.
That's insane.
And the thing is, anyone buying, you're not buying this for funsies. You're buying this because you have a need.
Right.
And so that was my first real experience to the extreme cost inflation around accessibility items. And that's where our Amazon wish list started, was with that piece, that one thing right there, because I remember not having a job anymore and being like, I cannot pay $99 or whatever it is just to get 3 hinges for this one door.
Yeah.
And the realization of the cost that comes along with renovating the space to that.
Out of all of the things that you needed and all of like the cost for your renovation, which one was like the most expensive that you're like, this is ridiculous, this shouldn't be this much?
I would either say the cabinets, having to do all slide drawers, because like a cabinet with just a shelf, you can't
that
really
makes
access.
sense. I wouldn't have even thought about like, oh, you have to have a pull out for each cabinet.
Or the other one would be our bed. So we have a medical hybrid bed. It is an incredible bed. It's super comfy, it's so great, but it also costs about $10,000. And it was an astronomical cost that I kind of hated bidding too, because I never thought I'd be a person buying that expensive of a bed. But then after living in grandma's and not being able to share a bed with my husband for 9 months, $10,000 leaves your bank account a lot quicker than you'd like to admit.
Heck yeah.
You're like, okay, this is what we have to do.
Yeah. It was a huge comfort knowing that he wasn't going to sustain pressure sores from being on a crappy bed. It was incredible to know that he could comfortably raise his head up and feet up, which he couldn't do by himself independently. To know that if I ever needed to, there's a thing called a Hoyer lift. It's to lift those traditionally who have disabilities, to transfer them from bed to either a chair or a stretcher or anything like that. A Hoyer lift can fit under it. It can be the same level as a stretcher if needed. It has handrails. It has all of these features. That's why it's a medical bed hybrid. Versus,
it doesn't even look like it.
No, it's a beautiful bed.
No, it doesn't look like it at all.
Was the first person apparently from this company to get a single king, but that's because my fear of him not being able to feel his feet, he is able to, with his like momentum of his arms, able to rotate his body, but his feet and ankles could get caught in the crack between the bed and he would never know and keep going and just snap his foot.
Oh God.
And so, yeah, these are like it's the thing with renovating for accessibility is the super small nuances that make a space comfortable and functional versus like, of course you need to remove the wall that blocks this space to that space. That's the basic stuff. It's the stuff that makes it comfortable. It's having the roll under waterfall counter that hangs off so he can actually go underneath the counter. It's little things like that.
Yeah, I love that you guys thought about all that.
Oh, yeah, that's fun. That's definitely fun that he helped with that.
Hey, well, I gotta give him something, just something. We don't have to tell him. It's okay.
He supported me through all of my crazy adventures. It's like my path has just kind of been chosen this way. I originally went to school in college for 2 years for interior design and architecture. And so that was definitely a great tool to have in my back pocket when figuring out these crazy logistics of a home. But I am forever thankful.
Well, there you go. See, it was meant to be that you had those in your back pocket.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask the fun question because I know people are going to want to know, and you take it wherever you want to be. But since you brought up your bed,
yes,
how has your intimate relationship changed because of this whole thing? Because that's people that are going to go into this. That's going to be one question that they're going to want to know.
And totally, I'm so funny. I'm such an open book when it comes to these things. And Mitch is not as much to like the general public.
Actually, pretty impressed with him because he was like, I just want to be intimate with my wife. And we were like,
yeah,
for you.
Yeah. It's one of those things when you look at any of like the quote unquote influencers who are in similar roles, that's always where like it stops. And I remember being an inpatient and being like, so when we go home, what's going to happen? Because similarly to like your leg's not working, when we say nothing works underneath your nipple line, we mean nothing.
We mean nothing. We mean nothing.
We mean nothing. And so luckily, Mitch has arm function and hand function. And so unlike a lot of other quad couples, we are able to cuddle. We are able to hold hands. We are able to, I mean, he can hug me like, oh my God, I get the best hugs.
Don't doubt it.
Which that is a large part of intimacy, which I think I recognize and appreciate so much more now. When it comes to the other half of intimacy, it has definitely been a range of trial and error.
Yeah.
You definitely learn to get creative. For me, I found shortly after Mitch's accident a group called WAGS, which is the Wives and Girlfriends of Spinal Cord Injury. And they have a group that's literally called WAGS After Dark. And
I love it.
I love it. Yeah.
It is based on open conversation. It could be about sex. It couldn't be about sex. Say you had a question about a pressure sore, X, Y, and Z. And
something that's a little bit more gross or something.
Yeah. And my first time on, it happened to be show and tell. And so people brought out their toys and what was working for them and for their partner. And I was like, these are my people. These people who are just open and honest and having conversations to help benefit our whole community. Because at the end of the day, they talk about like things that you need to live is like food, shelter, water, and sex. And when you look at like the hierarchy structure of like what we need as a society and as an individual, that is included in that. Especially
well, you guys are a young couple. Not to say that older couples don't, but let's be real. You guys are younger. You've been married for a year. Like,
it's huge. It's a huge part of your relationship. And if it's not, that's a whole different conversation. But for us, it definitely was. I mean, we, dated through high school and then got back together in college, and we were young and it was easy and you didn't have to think about it. And I think that was the hardest part for me
is now there's more thought.
Having to think about sex and having to plan and do things beforehand. And it's definitely a huge change and shift.
It's like a production now. I can only imagine that it's a production now because Mitchell's needs are just so much higher too.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also need to be able to take a step back from caregiver and step into wife. And lover. I mean, at the end of the day, it's sometimes I'll be prepping things and making sure the room's clean and doing all these things. And then I'll be like, yeah, I'm tired now. I just want to like order pizza and lay down in our clean room. And that's
fine.
Yeah. And he's so amazing about like understanding my needs as well. And it's the other side of it is, although things may not work to the extent that he'd like things to, he still has wants and needs. He's still a man. He still has drive. He has all these things. And so it's figuring out the balance and what works for you as a couple. And like, if I could ever give advice to someone with an SCI is like, try the weird things that you'd say you'd never try and figure out what works. And if it doesn't,
move
throw it
on.
in the trash. Like move on to the next. Because I've talked to other women as well as myself and be like, yep, my experiences with a quadriplegic man or a man who's disabled is no worse than, if not better than, those who are able-bodied.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely it's nerve-wracking at first because it's figuring it out. But then once you do, it's incredible. And it can be just as good, if not better, than before.
I love it.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's motivating. That should be motivating to people alone. Just because things don't work how you think they should work doesn't mean they can't work.
Yes. Yeah. And a crazy thing about SCIs is that you can regain function up to, they say traditionally about 2 years, your body is no longer in shock. And you can regain major body groups or function or sensation up to like 5 years.
Because like, I don't know who I heard it from, but somebody was like, no, he has 2 years. If he doesn't gain function, that's it. It's over. Nothing else can happen.
There's some people who believe that, and that's because your body's in shock for about 2 years. And so they think like once the shock is over, like there's no more healing through that. But that's really when like your body
starts again.
Yeah, you're able to function in the body that it's no longer foreign. It is, more routine, and your new normal is just normal now.
Makes sense.
And that's often where you see a lot of strives with people, if it's in just like physical ability, or actual physical aspects of their body. So like they might regain function or sensation in different places. It's totally different for everyone though.
Well, hopefully Mitchell's dream comes true and he regains sensation. He's like, man, all I want is sensation. I could care less about not walking. I just would like to feel, please.
Yep. It's funny once people, and I hear this from like everyone who's been working with SCIs for like 20 plus years. Once you realize that walking, not even is out of sight, but like isn't your main priority, all you care about is your penis working. Like base level. It's like, if you have finger function, you go straight to that. If you don't have finger function, it might be that you can flick people off. Like we're really just toughing it there. Yeah. And Mitch is in wheelchair rugby. And whenever we talk about hands, they're like, I just want to flick somebody off. I'm like, yeah, I know. You'll get there though. Just keep using that putty. But yeah, that's always funny.
Then I guess Mitchell is lucky that he has really good use of his hands.
Yeah. I always like to joke that it's completely accredited to me. I definitely know it's beyond that, but I like to take a good 90% of that accreditation.
Hey, Mitchell gave you that 90% credibility.
Thank
he was
you.
Like, yeah, even when we were still in the hospital, in the ICU, they had me playing with putty and putting stuff into little containers. He definitely gave you credit.
Yeah, with having experience in fine motor and OT previously in different roles in my life, I instantly went into like, how can I fix? How can I make better? And that's what I knew how to do. And so I bought a bunch of fine motor skills, like toys and tools. Unfortunately, they were all like 3-year-old colored, which is a whole different epidemic that we have in our society that I need to deal with at some point. But yeah, I definitely made him like, he didn't realize even when he was still in a coma, I was like stretching his fingers out, making him do different exercises with his hands, feet, and arms.
Yeah.
Because if you don't keep things moving, that's when you lose things.
Oh, yeah.
Well, dexterity is the hardest to get back. We had John on who had the double arm transplant. And that's been the hardest thing with the double transplant is getting the dexterity in his hands and fingers. He still has like, they're still not all there. But I mean, an arm transplant's a little bit of a different story. But still, the dexterity is the hardest thing.
Yeah. And a big thing So when your spinal cord gets impacted, what's happening is that your nerves are, if you think of your nerves, they're similar like a root system from a tree and they're being cut off. And so you're trying to reconnect and wake up these roots, which are your nerves, to different parts of your body. And so that's where often a lot of times like those who are quads or paras even will have like static, similar to like if you think of like the static on a TV screen, and that's a sensation that they'll feel in places that they don't have function. Like Mitch's full underarm and his hand are just staticky. He can't feel them. Yeah. That's why he doesn't mind getting an IV.
Well, that also makes sense though, because John talked about that too. That guys that lose limbs have phantom limb syndrome. So it's a similar type of concept. You're getting that tingly sensation.
You feel like it's there and it's not.
Right, exactly. And they have that same sensation. They feel like their limb is there and it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, a lot of TV static in the quad community.
What has it been like getting around in areas that aren't prepared for somebody in a wheelchair? And going out, even though they say that they're ADA and they're really not. What do you do?
Internalize frustration and ableist concepts and thoughts in a community that we've been built into for decades is the first thing that I do, because my instant reaction is to start screaming and yelling, and that's not socially acceptable. What? And so it's when you're constantly faced with adversity, it's so hard some people defer to staying silent. So I won't say it's so hard to stay silent. For me, it's very hard to stay silent. So Mitch and I are very creative. We're young and we're strong. And so we're able to overcome a lot of things. People use that as an excuse to invite and think that inaccessible spaces are socially acceptable. But there's going to be a day that one of us get hurt. And there's going to be a day that people wake up and realize it's not acceptable.
Not okay.
It's not okay.
Yep.
I mean, I think about one of my first times going out after Mitch's accident. Connie, you were actually there. They didn't have, or like everybody was sitting at the bar instead of at a traditional cafe height table. No, I was, the moment I really think of though is going to, I mean, I'll comment, I don't care, Pops Fox's in Orland Park. We were going to get dinner with your dad. We go there, and to get to the main floor, you have to go into a curb that isn't really have a curb cut like it's supposed to. And then you go to what they call like the wheelchair elevators, where it's just like there's no top or no sides. It just moves you up and down.
Oh, God. But I remember that.
There was no one who properly knew how to use it. So then it's me, who I've only ever used it at like venues before that are non-accessible. And then the girl closed the door on Mitch's foot and started the machine and almost took his foot off.
Oh, Lord.
And it's those pure moments of, this kid is 17. It is not her fault that she is not prepared properly. It is not her fault that this restaurant does not have the proper accommodations besides using this piece of equipment. That doesn't make it okay or make it right. And I think that's been the really hard part for me, is people are like, well, we have XYZ. I'm like, stop making excuses and make things better. My personal favorite is that places are grandfathered into being inaccessible.
What?
And I'm like, so yeah, we're just going to live by the way of the 1800s of where people in wheelchairs and walkers don't come out into society. And you can keep pretending that's okay. I will just never support you or the things that you do.
Yeah.
And I will speak out about it. I am a very loud person who is not afraid to use their voice for things that are greater good for the society. And this is definitely and strongly included in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just nuts to think that even in 2023, that there isn't just basic levels of inclusion. I mean, we see this across social justice, across different thoughts and concepts of people between the LGBTQIA community, between different rights of women and everything. You don't see inclusion, but something that when you think about disability, you inevitably will have a disability in your life. It is not when you, it is, or if you, it is when you have a disability. You're going to age out. If you don't age out to where you're above 55, you're going to get sick and die before then. these are your options. You know, disability is such a larger range of what people recognize it as, and accessibility is aligned with disability. And disability in the United States is in 1 in 4 people, so 25%. That's today, not including people like me. There's one day I'm going to have disability. And so it's just crazy to think that we are building a world and a place that isn't accessible for everybody who is going to have a disability one day. So yeah,
it is.
Spaces that aren't accessible are very frustrating and very dangerous for those who have disabilities.
So when you get frustrated, after the event that you're frustrated, how do you decompress when everything gets too stressful? We might as well go into it right after, this is how you got frustrated. Now, how do you decompress?
Yeah. As a caregiver, this is when I say like the caregiver crisis, this is the large part that people don't have time or capacity to do due to lack of support from either government or the space that you're in, XYZ. Like, we don't qualify for in-home assistance for Mitch. And so that means everything falls on my plate. And so with that, I also work full-time. I commute to the city every day. And that is a choice that I made, don't get me wrong, but I also made that choice so I could make a living that could support us. So when it comes to like, what do you do to decompress? Sleep. It's so sad, but by the time that I'm done, I mean, I'm even looking at my house now and like this, cute, that, disaster. Like, behind this laptop, I've been traveling for 3 weeks between work and wheelchair rugby. I haven't had time to put away this 3 suitcases from the past 3 trips I've had. I haven't had time to finish cleaning the kitchen. And so to even think about taking time and capacity to do something for me seems outlandish. Traditionally, the times that I take for myself is after I burn out. Like yesterday, we got home and I looked at Mitch and I was like, I'm either going to cry or lay down. So here are 2 options. So crying while cleaning, or just laying down and watching TV for 30 minutes and just taking a moment. So that's normally what my current stress relief is just mindless, nothing thought. And then my other thing is I'm a huge mental health advocate. I think everybody needs to go to talk therapy. If you think you need to or not, it'll be good for you. But for me, I go every week, if not every other week, because life is crazy. But that has been one of my greatest support systems through this. And even if I'm not talking and making groundbreaking moves, I'm spending an hour for myself. I have dedicated to myself.
Your mental health.
Choosing me.
Yep.
And I'm choosing the space that makes me feel comfortable. So that's definitely like my other thing. I'm like, oh yes, Tuesday nights tomorrow, I get to go to therapy. It's so important though. That's definitely like, for me, those are my 2 things. Mindless TV and therapy.
Therapy is very important. I'm glad you said that. And then because we asked Mitch, and we're going to see if you guys have maybe the same answer, or if it's going to be totally different. If you could go anywhere, if you could travel anywhere, where would you go?
Maldives, in an overwater bungalow.
Yep. Okay, exactly, you got the same answer.
That's my man. That's my man.
And me and Rihanna said that we should just make it a family trip and all go.
Yeah,
like on the anniversary, on like the anniversary of his injury in like 5 years or something.
Yeah.
So originally, I mean, you guys both know our wedding was planned to be in Riviera Maya, Mexico, on 11/6/21. 73 days earlier, his accident happened before our wedding.
It was insane.
Our big wedding. And so us being the nutballs that we are, and Mitch waking up and writing on a piece of paper, we're still having a wedding. I postponed it 2 years, like any sane person does.
Of course.
And so now we're 9 months and 5 days away from our wedding in Mexico. But before all of this happened, our game plan was to honeymoon in Maldives. And then when we realized the price tag of that, we were like, well, then we'll just make it a 5-year anniversary and we'll do a vow renewal in Maldives. Now will probably be 10 years because
being the price tag
extremely expensive. So yeah, definitely still down for Maldives. I don't care if the overwater bungalow is not accessible. Those are staircases I will pick him up
I will pick him up myself, gosh darn it.
Because
fireman carry his ass.
Experience. Yeah, I've done it a couple times, so it wouldn't be the first time.
That's insane.
I bet that makes him feel super manly.
So big. I laugh because my first time doing it was in pure fear when living at grandma's house that he could not do an independent transfer and we couldn't do it fast enough. If there was an emergency, we could not do it fast enough to get him out of the house into his chair safely, especially if it was like disassembled in any sense. So I was probably enjoying a bottle of wine to have this grand idea, but he was laying on his bed and I turned him to where his legs were hanging off and I looked at him. I was like, I'm going to squat down. I'm going to wrap your legs around my waist. I'm going to squeeze super tight and you're going to wrap your arms around my neck and I'm going to squat you up. And he's like, this is a horrible idea. And I was like,
we're doing it.
If there's a fire, I need to be able to run you out of the building. He's like, I have a wheelchair. And I'm like, I need to know this. And I genuinely, like, I couldn't sleep that night, not knowing that I could take care of him in that way. So I did it. And I was super proud of myself. I squatted him and everything. And I was like, look, I can do it. So yeah, that was the first time I did it. And then it's happened probably a couple other times from random things, probably mostly for my enjoyment, to be honest, and not emergency situations. But I always find it funny. He's a really, really good sport. I do a lot of things that probably most guys would be like, absolutely not. But it's fun. Like his pedicures that I gave him in the ICU. I was using foot scrubs on his feet. And I was like, I just need some kind of a normalcy.
Let me give you a pedicure. I can't give myself one, but I'll give you one.
There you go.
Seriously. I thought it would wake up the nerve endings. I got all excited. Who knows?
I mean, it's not a bad thought. I mean,
most people try pedicures.
Yeah, most people try not to kick the lady when they go get a pedicure. So I mean, it's not a bad thought.
There was a dream that created a thought process that told me that a pedicure was the right answer. Don't know where it came from, but it happened.
I love it. So Sarah, any last thoughts for our listeners?
Oh man, out of everything I prepared, you would think this was the one. Man, I just think my big thing is like, if you see someone with a disability, if it's invisible or visible, they are just a person. Mm-hmm. They deserve to be treated like everybody else. And if they need accommodations, and when I say that, I mean in the sense of like special accommodations, they're just an accommodation because they're just a human like everybody else. It's the same way that you like parking on one side of the driveway versus the other is the same thing as them needing a ramp to get into the house. Because it's an inconvenience for you does not mean that they're qualified for it. That's kind of been a big thing for me of not only with Mitch, but with being more engulfed in the community, is hearing a lot of super, super tragic stories of people being disowned by family, of being talked down to and ridiculed by random strangers who have no right to speak to anyone that way, to be put in special ed classes because they look differently, although they have no cognitive dysfunction. The stories, I mean, I could literally go on for hours speaking of stories for others, but just be a good person. Like, it's really not that hard.
Yeah. Everybody just be a good person.
As a society, think that being a good person is super difficult, and we make it difficult. Just be kind and be a good person and help where help is needed.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is Having You When Shit Gets Real, guys, and we'll see y'all next episode.